All right, so hi there. My name is CJ, and I'm one of the lead pastors here at the Evolution. So again, I want to wish you a very happy Easter and welcome to our new home. Now, I know it's not fully done up yet, but we're still excited to share it with you anyway and to come back after in a couple of weeks, in a couple of months and see the finished product. We put so much hard work into it. We've been waiting for this home for 2 years about already. So it's been a really long journey for us, but we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, yeah? We're dreaming of a better future. I don't know whether that's how you feel, but that's how I feel right now, okay? So if you ask me, one of the most important things about Easter is how Jesus gave his life to change our future and to give us hope of what our future could potentially be. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard it presented that way, that is what Easter is about, or most of the time, I don't know, maybe you go to church and all you hear is sin, 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 repent from your sin and follow Jesus, otherwise you're going to hell. Okay, but I believe actually really the essence of Jesus is that he came to change humanity so that we could make a better future. And right now, I don't know about you, right, but for me, right, my own personal life and in the way the world is going right now, you know, direction and the chaos that it's in, you know, I'm really looking for something to hold on to, a hope to hold on to, amen? So just a show of hands here, right? How many of you here in the last year or so, just waking up to your life or waking up to the news has been quite exhausting? I just heard a lot of sighs across the room, okay? How many of you have been experiencing some kind of undercurrent of anxiety or angst in your life? You know, your life could be going well. Your life could be going badly. Or for some of you, maybe you're just cruising, it's going okay. But somehow, right, there's just this disconcerting feeling. Something is disturbing your peace on the inside, right? Now, some of you, it may be disturbing you more because you're on social media too much like me, okay? But how we respond, right, to this chaos, right, it varies according to our personality, correct? So again, right, quick survey right now, right, who here, the feeling you have, this undercurrent, right, in your heart is anxiety? Oh, come on, be honest. I'm raising my hand here. Anxiety, raise hand, hi, okay? Who here is frustration? How many of you here is occasional rage? How many of you feel numb and feel paralyzed? How many of you got not enough hands to put up? Yes, me too, all right? So we've all been feeling some kind of way. Especially if you read the news or you wake up and you doom scroll like I do, okay? You go to work, you get on with school, your day-to-day life. You may even be succeeding and achieving, because I think our church tends to attract a lot of high achievers. Are you here? But somehow, even with all the good stuff, the stuff to be grateful for, the breakthroughs, the blessings, a holiday, a good meal, a good massage, right? It isn't somehow fixing this feeling that we have on the inside that something is missing and something is lacking. Anyone feel that way? Yes. Am I in good company today? All right. So now one more, okay? How many of you here, and this one you don't have to raise your hands, right, have been going through some really difficult times personally in your life? That lately it's made it very hard not to feel drained, not to feel burnt out even, not to become jaded, even though you generally are a positive person, and even though you keep on putting one foot in front of the other. Listen, I feel you, because I've been going through a tough time myself, and I want you to know that you are in good company here today. Everybody has seasons of their life where things are difficult. And so I want to share a passage that I've been reflecting on this Easter. And it's a passage about holding on to our faith. And, you know, this unknown writer of the letter of Hebrews in our Bible is writing to a particular group of people, the Hebrews, okay? So it's called a letter to the Hebrews. And he's trying to encourage them with something that they are going through in life. Okay, and so one of the things he says, and I'm going to pick out a whole chunk for you, but there's just one verse I want us to focus on. It's up on the projection. It says there, "But you have drawn near to Mount Zion, which is the mountain of God, the city of the living God, a heavenly Jerusalem, to countless angels in a festival gathering, to the assembly of God's firstborn children who are registered in heaven, to God the judge of all, to the spirits of the righteous who have been made perfect." A lot of jargon, right? But here's the one verse, okay? And verse 24, it says, to Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks better than Abel's blood. Now, I don't know how many of you here are familiar with Christianity, okay? But blood is a very important imagery for Christians. It is one of the anchoring metaphors of our faith because it describes what we believe about Jesus and what we believe about humanity. So throughout the Bible, you'll find, right, that blood is talked about in this kind of duality kind of way. Right? Blood can depict violence and vengeance and contamination even. But blood can also represent life and salvation, peace and purification. Which is very contradicting, right? Now, which meaning it takes on when you read about it in the Bible, it actually depends on why the blood is spilt. So in this verse, the unknown writer of Hebrews chooses to reference this ancient Jewish story about Cain and Abel. Right? It talks about the blood of Abel, right? So it's this narrative that's found in Genesis about the first two sons of Adam and Eve. The first two brothers, as legend goes, to ever exist in the world. So the story goes like this. It tells us Cain, who was the older brother, grew increasingly jealous of Abel, his younger brother's relationship with God. Because to Cain, Abel was more loved, more favored, and more blessed by God. And so day after day, year after year, Cain's anger and resentment towards Abel grew. And one day, in a fit of jealousy, he murders his brother Abel. And this marks the beginning, the first of many murders, violent acts, war, and genocide that human beings, God's people included, will go on to commit. And it's all recorded in our Bible. But what's interesting about this legend is that it tells us that after Abel's blood was spilt on the ground, it cries out to God from the earth. Okay, it says, and because it cried out from the earth, the Lord says to Cain, where is Abel, your brother? And this is where we get the famous saying. It actually comes from this story about Cain and Abel. Cain replies to God, I do not know, am I my brother's keeper? Everybody knows that phrase, right? Am I my brother's keeper? And the answer to that question determines the course of humanity. You see, if our answer to that question is yes, we are our brother's keepers, then the world has potential to be blessed. But if our answer is no, like Cain's answer was no, then we become cursed. You see, because the answer in Cain's heart to God was no, and because he violently took the life of his brother Abel, Cain becomes cursed. And as we will read on, because of that, the earth also becomes cursed under his hands. So this legend that is so famous in our Bible, right, isn't just a story about two brothers, it's a story about our humanity. That when blood is spilled out of violence, out of jealousy, out of greed, out of selfishness, when human beings refuse to be our brother's keeper, turn to your neighbor next to you, look at them, smile at them. That's your brother, are you here with me? When we refuse to be that person's keeper, we become cursed. Our efforts become cursed. Our hard work, our blood, right? Our sweat, we like to say that. Our blood, our sweat, our tears in making a life, right? Becomes cursed. And so the writer of Hebrews, he brings up this story, the blood of Abel. And he contrasts it with the blood of Jesus, right? This is Easter, so that's why we're talking about the blood of Jesus, right? And what he's trying to say is the blood of Jesus is different. Let me read for you again. Jesus, the mediator of the new covenant, a new way of relationships, to the sprinkled blood that speaks better than Abel's blood. So unlike Abel's blood, Jesus' blood speaks better. Isn't that quite a beautiful way to say it? The blood that speaks better. Now, why does it speak better? Why? Because of the way it was spilt. In the first story, life was taken. But in the second story, Jesus' story of the crucifixion, life was given. Now, mind you, right, both Abel and Jesus actually died really violently. Abel was slain by his brother. Jesus was crucified by the Romans and the Jewish leaders. But what Christians believe is that when it comes to Good Friday and Easter, it wasn't primarily people who nailed Jesus to the cross. It was Jesus who consciously made a decision to sacrifice his own life for the sake of humanity. To forgive our violence, to redeem our humanity, to give us a new way of living, to set an example for us moving forward. And that is why Hebrews says this blood, the story of this blood, speaks way better than the first story. Right, I like how the Message translation puts it. It's very, very direct. It says, you come to Jesus who presents us with a new covenant, a fresh charter from God. He is the mediator of this covenant. The murder of Jesus, unlike Abel's, is a homicide. You know, Abel's is a homicide that cried out for vengeance. But the homicide of Jesus became a proclamation of grace. And he goes on to say, the writer of Hebrews, he tells the Christians, so don't turn a deaf ear to these gracious words. Now, back to the historical context of what we're reading here today, right? There are a lot of theories why this letter in the Bible was written. But one very clear impression you will get if you were to read it is that the people in this letter that it was directed at, right, they were in a season where they desperately needed encouragement. For whatever reason, circumstances that they were in were making it hard to keep their faith. And some of them in this church were wondering whether being faithful to Jesus' values was worth it. Was it worth keeping the hope? Was it worth fighting to build a better world that will one day maybe pay off into a heavenly kingdom? You know, they were trying to believe that what Jesus promised, that heaven could be a real place. You know, they were like, is this for real? Was Jesus true? Right? Because listen, besides blood, right, there's another concept in our Bible that Christians love to talk about, and it's the concept of heaven. Everybody say heaven. And listen, heaven is even harder to unpack than blood. Are you here with me? And never mind, right, it's partner concept. When you talk about heaven, you got to talk about hell. So some Christians believe that heaven and hell are literal places we go after we die. I used to believe that, okay? Some Christians believe that heaven and hell are already here in this reality. Now myself, I now lean towards the second definition, and some sort of third in between that I haven't fully figured out even how to say it as a pastor. But here's one thing I know for sure. You don't need to be a Christian to believe in hell. Hell is already here. Every single day. And some of our fellow human beings will unfortunately experience more hell than any of us will ever be able to fathom. Which brings me to my next thought, right? I believe that the mandate and calling of every human being, whether you are Christian or not, is not to wait for heaven to arrive, but to find a way to create a heaven now. To do whatever part we can with the life that we have, as long as we have blood in our veins, to make heaven on this earth, not just for ourselves, but for everyone and for generations that will come after we are gone. You don't need to be a Christian to know this to be true, right? And so this is what I want to share with you this Easter. The title of my message is Blood That Speaks Better. You know, how can we be part of the solution to our own anxiety? How can we be part of making the world better, not worse, so that we can all have a little less anxiety? You see, each one of us here has only one life, one body that has finite time and finite blood and tears and sweat to offer. One day, we will all return to the earth. Hopefully not violently, are you here with me? And the question will be, what will our blood have been spilt for, and what will our lives speak? So, point number one for you today, I want to talk about being others-centric. About being our brother's keeper. So if you forget everything I say today, remember this word, others. Because I think that's one of the first defining characteristics of Jesus that everybody should be very clear on. Jesus was and is for others. You know, I don't know how Christianity seems to have fallen so far away from that truth and become so self-orientated about all about me, my success, my blessing. I want to be the favored one. Because anytime God called any human being in the Bible, the promise for that person's future was always tied to a calling and responsibility. And that calling was tied to others. You see, to Adam and Eve, when God created the world, he said, take care of the earth and all its creatures and inhabitants. To Abraham, he said, I will make you a blessing, and through you all the families of the earth will be blessed. To Peter and his disciples, he said, hey, you used to fish only for yourself, to feed yourself, but now I'll make you fishers of men and shepherds of people. And even in the story of Cain and Abel, you know, why did the curse come instead of the blessing? Because Cain failed in his calling. His calling was to be his brother's keeper. So I want to share with you, right, a study that our leadership team has been reading this year, thanks to our other lead pastor, Edwin, right? It's the National Volunteer and Philanthropy Center's National Giving Study from 2023. Okay, they are a great organization. Our organization, COW, is supported by them. Listen, so they did a survey, and they do this every year, and the last one that was released was from 2023, okay? And here's an interesting excerpt from their summary. They reported, while volunteering has rebounded since the beginning of the pandemic, the number of people donating has remained, and the number of people donating has remained stable. People have cut back on the hours they volunteer and the amount they donate. But don't seem like that, right? Social media seems like everybody generous, everybody giving, everybody standing up for justice, right? But no, people have cut back on the hours they volunteer and the amount they actually donate. So they're talking a lot, but they're not doing a lot. Median hours volunteered decreased in each of the last 3 rounds of this study. So over 3 years, it's been declining from 24 hours in 2018 to 9.43 hours in 2023. Median amount donated increased from 100 in 2018 to 200 in 2021, but decreased again to 100 in 2023. Okay? Now, I will acknowledge, the study also acknowledges that there could be many reasons for this decline, okay? Our generation, millennials, Gen Z, we definitely got more financial pressures, although if we are truly honest with ourselves, a lot of it is more spending pressure than it is having insufficient means to be generous. Yes, yes, turn to your neighbor, say, hey, don't lie to me. Okay, our generation also, I don't know, sometimes nowadays, right, we struggle to figure out which problem we want to tackle first. Because, right, there's too much information. There's too many Kickstarter donation, campaigns. We don't know which to give to. Do you ever feel overwhelmed sometimes? Which cause should I give my time and my money to? Which problem should I solve first? But I do want to challenge all of us here, right? Just because it's getting harder to put others first tangibly, it doesn't mean we should stop. You see, the part of this study, right, that disturbed me the most was that when MVPC interviewed volunteers and donors to ask them about their motivation for giving, they found that in Singapore, more and more people were giving for self-interested reasons rather than others-centric motivations. So if you look here, right, these are the reasons people give, and then those are the other-centric, and then you can see the arrow, right, is going down. Okay? So some do it to enhance their career prospects, to learn skills, to put it on their portfolio. So one 18-year-old said this, right, I get motivated by building my portfolio and getting volunteer experiences so that my portfolio looks good a lot. English not so good, okay? Others did it to feel good about themselves. Many older people say it was to make sure that they had good karma and they got blessings for God in return for their giving. Now, many youth said they give out of peer pressure to fit in with friends, to look good to their peers. Now, some do it to bond with friends. So it says that if I think, this 23-year-old student say, I think if it's something that helps and you and your friends bond together, maybe it's worth it. Cannot just be worth it for the sake of worth it. Okay. But the answers that disturbed me the most were the ones who did it for rewards, for themselves. Okay, so this is one 18-year-old student, something about the 18-year-old students in 2023. Another experience that I'm looking at is overseas volunteering experience. If you volunteer overseas, in exchange you can get free hostel stays or free food or something like that. Oh gosh, what's going on, 18-year-olds? How old are they now? You know, this was 2023, so they are 20 years old now. If you are dating a 20-year-old, right now, you better check what their value system is. Are you hearing me? Because too many of our generation are starting to walk like Cain. Now, are there still people who are other-centric in their motivations? Yes, of course, but less, according to the survey, and that is dropping. And that worries me. Are you hearing me? You know, because it seems like nowadays giving and volunteering is becoming a branding and self-centered endeavor. Which, funny enough, right, for the Christians who know the details of the story of Cain and Abel, right, let me tell you this. Do you know why God rejected Cain? Because Cain and Abel were bringing their offerings, their givings to God, but Cain's offering came out of a wrong motivation, and so God rejected his offering, but accepted Abel's. And that was the inciting incident that made Cain kill his brother. You see, our ability to be other-centric is not a small matter to God. And even if you don't believe in God, the consequence of human beings being increasingly selfish is that the world will become a more violent, more difficult, more chaotic, more challenging place to live in, and all of us suffer together for it. So here's one of my thoughts about heaven and hell, right? Like the concept of blood in the Bible, heaven and hell in our Bible are two sides of a duality. If our lives speak like Cain, then hell will become our reality. But if we want our reality to become more like heaven, then our lives must speak more like Jesus. We must become more other-centered. We must take on the conviction of becoming our brother's keeper. So can I share with you a very inspiring story from this weekend? So yesterday, right, Riley, one of our youth leaders here at the Evolution, she got up and she shared her story of living for others, okay? Now, I have known Riley. Where's Riley? Very shy Riley over there, okay? I've known her for a very long time, since she was 14 or 15 years old, correct? And I remember she was one of those teenagers who would come to church and was super emo, you know? And she would really stress out every time she volunteered in church. You know, so initially the first few years were really rough, are you here with me? But eventually her relationship with Jesus began to take off and something began to change about Riley. Now, I believe this about her. She has always had it in her a good heart. A good, compassionate, empathetic spirit. But what I do think is that Jesus was a big part in pulling that part of her out and getting her to become more confident in it. Now, let me say this about Riley. Like Helena, right, she does a lot of things in our church. She's a youth leader who regularly runs events, takes care of young people coming to our church. She sometimes preaches. She also puts a lot of time into organizing youth volunteer events for our Change Our World Community Services organization. And on top of that, she's on the worship team, sometimes on the operations team. She's also a double major in uni. Okay? So I'm already, as is, right, blown away by her level of volunteerism. Aren't you? And you know, as a leader, right, I often want to say, hey, you are doing too much. Maybe you need to cut back. And sometimes I speak to her leaders who are under me and say, hey, be careful with her workload, okay? Too much is not good for her long term. You don't want her to burn out. But yesterday, she came up to share her story and, you know, about how God came into the life and showed her calling to be a voice to the voiceless. And I've heard this story so many times, okay? But yesterday, she told her story differently. And I find out for the first time that in the midst of all she has been doing, for the last 2 years, every single week, she has been tutoring a deaf teen. Every week. Now, do you know how much of a commitment that is to tutor somebody every single week for 2 years? On top of everything she's already doing. And none of us knew about it until the testimony team interviewed her and dug the story out of her. Listen, I have never been more proud because she is walking the way of Jesus on her own. no coercion, not for anybody to see, not for personal gain, not so she can tell everybody how great she is. She's living for others because that is her value system. And in the last few years, because of that, she's created a little bit of heaven in that teen's life. You see, Jesus' blood is speaking a better future for that teen through her. So, friends, I want to ask you today, what is something you can do for someone else this year? Even if you yourself are having a rough time. How can you live an others-centered life? You know, have you been somebody else's keeper other than your own keeper? Because I promise you, doing something for others can only make your life better. Genuinely giving without a hidden agenda will naturally invite good into your life. Others. That's number one. Number two, I want to encourage all of us here to live with more kindness. And if you can, go all the way Jesus teaches Christians to go, which is to love even your enemy. You know, I'm convinced that so much of the anxiety and the pressure that's circulating in the air today is because, for whatever reason, we can blame it on social media, we can blame it on Trump, right? We've become a world of too much unkindness. You know, nowadays, right, I can't even bring myself to read the comment section on viral posts or news articles because 7, 8, 9 out of 10 will be critical, judgmental, racist, ignorant, sexist comments. And often, even when I follow social justice warriors, you know, sometimes, you know, the social justice posts can be so crass and so abusive. Are you here? And listen, I'm someone that exposed vulgarity, you know, I get angry or I go, right? But sometimes it's too much. Are you here with me? So even though we're not the ones out there fighting the real physical wars that are going on in the world, we're killing each other psychologically and relationally. And sometimes I wonder, right, do we really think we can create a better world through more violence? By character assassinating my oppressor? By shaming the bully? You know, if I can win them, I can take over, and then once I take over, I will create more peace. America should hire me to be the president. Are you here? You see, one of the things, right, that Jesus calls his followers to do is to put away our swords. In fact, he said to his top disciple, right, the leader of the disciples, to Peter, those who take up the sword will die by the sword. You know, when I was a political science student in undergrad, right, we used to study different political thought, different political philosophy. And if you don't know this, right, we don't just study like politics, we study life because life is politics. All right? And so I remember in one of the classes, right, and very often in my political philosophy classes, one of the criticisms about Jesus that will constantly come up is that he is a pacifist. That means he's someone that does no harm, will not pick up a gun, will not go to war, none of those things, okay? And people are really like, yeah, you know, Jesus is a pacifist, he's not realistic, you know, in the world that we are living in. And so when I was a young uni student, and back then hyper-conservative, evangelical, Bible-pounding Christian, right, I would get really upset in class. You know, I'd be like, how dare you speak about my God in that way? How dare you make Jesus out to be weak, right? Because, you know, and I would go, you know, hey, there's also imagery in the Bible of God being a man of war. A verse where Jesus says he didn't come to bring peace, but he came to bring a sword. But basically, I was just jumping to defend Jesus. Now again, I don't have all the answers, but now after many years, I would say, yeah, Jesus probably was a pacifist. And if we don't like that term, then let's just say Jesus was an advocate of nonviolence. Jesus was an advocate for radical kindness. You see, one of the ways he departed from Judaism back 2,000 years ago was on the issue of forgiveness. Again, forgiveness is this big theme and lesson in Christianity. There is no Christianity without forgiveness. I mean, just think about what Jesus said on the cross, right? When he was dying there on the cross, one of the most important things he said was, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Jesus on the cross suffering, cannot breathe, bleeding, in pain. He forgave the corrupt religious leaders who put him there. He forgave the people they bribed who gave false testimony to put him there. He forgave the followers who abandoned him when he was in trouble because they were scared that they would get thrown into prison. And then, never mind the big theological thing, which was Jesus took on all the sin and brokenness of humanity from the beginning of time to the future, and he took that upon himself and he forgave us. There is no Christianity without forgiveness. So one of my biggest heroes, right, is Martin Luther King Jr. I assume most of you know who he is, right? If you don't, then go Google later, all right? He, along with Gandhi, Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, and one who's still alive, the Dalai Lama, they are my heroes, the Pope, hero, are you here with me? Now, just a show of hands, right, let's just see, right, who here was born in the 20th century? Raise your hand. That means 1900s. Are you here? Who? The rest of you? 2,000 babies. Wow. Are you here with me? Okay, so listen. There were all the 2,000 babies, listen up, all right? There was a time, not so long ago, my time, all the millennials, right, when our heroes were not the rich tech billionaires or the social media influencers, but people like them who transformed the very moral fabric of the world. When we dream of who we want to become, these were our heroes. Now, I know it's very hard for most of us here to imagine a time where women were not allowed to vote, where employers could discriminate legally based on sex or gender or race. But many of the things that we accept as a norm today that are more fair and more equal were not norms 50, 60 years ago, But there were people and communities that set out to create a better world, and many of them often paid with their lives in order to do it, like the people behind me. And Martin Luther King Jr. was one of those people. He led the civil rights movement for only 13 years before he was assassinated. But in those 13 years, the impact he made ripples that go on until today. And if you were to ask me what was different about his version of social justice compared to the majority of what we see today on social media, it was his belief in a universal brotherhood. It was his conviction that you cannot create more peace in the world by enacting more violence. And so, right, Martin Luther King would train his followers to be radically nonviolent. Even when the law branded them criminals for just existing and for protesting, he said, don't fight back. Even when the police themselves would beat them, sometimes spray them down with hoses, and hurt them and throw them to jail, he said, do not do violence back. When so many in his community were injured and even lost their lives during the civil rights movement, Martin Luther trained and demanded that his followers maintain the way of Jesus. So this is one of the pledge cards, right, that everyone who joined his protest were required to sign. Right? So I hereby pledge myself, my person and my body to the non-violent movement. Therefore, I will keep the following 10 commandments. I will meditate daily on the teachings of the life of Jesus. I remember always that non-violent movement in Birmingham seeks justice and reconciliation, not victory. Walk and talk in the manner of love, for God is love. Pray daily to be used by God in order that all men might be free, not just black people. Sacrifice personal wishes in order that all men might be free. Observe with both friend and foe, enemy, the ordinary rules of courtesy. Seek to perform regular service for others and for the world. Refrain from the violence of fist, tongue. That's right. All the Gen Z say tongue. Are you here? You see, God agrees. And for the world. Okay? So strive to be in good spiritual and bodily health. Follow the directions of the movement and the captain of the demonstration. Okay? You see, what is the way of Jesus? The way of Jesus is about breaking the cycle of violence and vengeance. The never-ending cycle of retaliating. Of displacing one structure of power and control for another structure of power and control. See, I love the women's movement, for example. You know, I grew up in a time where it was very difficult to be a woman in the Christian context. But I always say this, right, to the girls in our church, right, if we are not careful, one day we will stop, by being feminists, we will stop creating equity, and all we will do is replace abusive patriarchy with abusive matriarchy. See, what will be the defining difference? How we speak. Will we speak with the blood of Abel, or will we speak with the blood of Jesus? Will we bring vengeance, or will we advocate for peace? See, one of the things that MLK said that I found so inspiring, right, when I learned his work is, he said this: in the process of gaining our rightful place, right, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Again and again, we must rise to majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. So I say this again, Jesus was not a weak pacifist. Jesus was strong. Because it takes more strength to forgive, to heal, to have compassion and love for your enemy than it takes to retaliate. You know, I don't think any human being is born thinking, I want to be an evil person. I want to be an angry being. You know, I don't think any of us wakes up when we are 14, 15 years old and say, you know what, I'm going to grow up to care only about myself, my success, and my achievements, and I will step on anybody I need to get ahead. I don't think God makes us that way and we are born that way. I think the broken world turns us that way, and we end up not knowing how to turn back. But I still think we can choose. And Jesus came to remind us that we can choose. I think we can choose to forgive so that we don't become bitter. I think we can choose to heal so we don't pay our hurts forward. You know, I see so many people, you know, social justice people that I admire their bravery. I admire how they are able to speak up, because I don't generally like to speak up a lot. I admire how articulate they are, because Singaporeans are not very articulate sometimes. But sometimes I also feel too many of them are not healed. And so instead of creating more change, they tend to create more pain. And they, in that way, they defeat their own goals. Instead of freedom, they bring more slavery and more bondage. So I think all of us here, right, we need to choose to have compassion and empathy even for our enemies. So that maybe by some chance, we can turn our enemies into our friends. Or at least less of our enemy. Now I know, this is not simple in day-to-day life and practice, correct? But it should be simple as far as our values and convictions go. We will never be perfect in our kindness. It's not possible. But if we can just make it our value system and make the effort to practice it a little bit more every day and every year, we just might have enough of us to make kindness more contagious than anger and anxiety. And enough of us say, this is enough. No more of this. Then maybe one day the bullies and fools will be the ones that are outnumbered instead of us. And the future can start looking brighter again. So listen, all the youth here, all the young adults here, listen, there is a Jesus way to do social justice. And let me tell you, when you do it His way, it will also be a less anxious way. You will sleep better at night. And it will also be a more effective way. You will see change come faster. See, this is what Martin Luther King used to say. We must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools. You cannot change the world if you cannot first love your enemy. Jesus changed the world by being kind and by loving His enemies. That includes you. Are you here? Finally, number 3, hope. Never surrender your hope. Hope has been quite a lot of work lately. You know, I remember a time in my life where hope wasn't this much work. I remember a time before COVID where it felt like the tides of the world were turned towards justice. where, the language was equality, equity, justice. Everybody should be included. Less war, more care for the planet. Peace and collaboration, am I correct? I remember a time when it felt easy for our church to lean into hope. But lately it feels like the tide has turned and we're swimming against an oncoming tsunami. But here's the thing, right? Bad times and evil times are nothing new. They are a cycle. Good and evil are another duality that you cannot escape. Right? 2 Timothy, right, it says here in 3:1, it says this, understand that the last days, everyone say last days. So the last days will be dangerous times. People will be selfish, love money. There will be the kind of people who brag and who are proud. They will slander others. They will be disobedient to their parents. They will be ungrateful, unholy, unloving, contrary, critical. They will be without self-control and brutal. And they won't love what is good. There will be people who are disloyal, reckless, and conceited. They will love pleasure instead of loving God. They will look like they are religious. So this is talking about Christians too, all right? Religious but deny God's power. Avoid people like this. Any of you will raise hand and say, that's me, I would like to be that. That's my goal in life. No, right? Avoid people like this. Their minds are corrupt and their faith is counterfeit, but they won't get very far. Their foolishness will become obvious to everyone like those others. Trump was looking good for a while. To a lot of people, right? Not to me, but to a lot of people. Elon Musk was looking very good to a lot of people. Now I will never buy a Tesla car. Right? Because we're starting to see them for the fools that they are. There's no running away. Evil people are foolish people. But anyway, now here's another concept in the Bible. Ready? And it's called the last days. Everyone say the last days. Now this one is a funny one, okay, how it came about. So the last days is this idea, this phrase, because while Jesus was on earth, he often talked about last days. Okay? And it's referring to the last days before the world will finally come to an end. And Jesus will return and he will make a new heaven and a new earth. A better heaven and a new earth, an ethical world. Okay? And so among his early followers, nobody knew when this was going to happen. He just said it would happen, but he didn't say when. And so among his followers 2,000 years ago, this became an idea that they clung to desperately because there was a season where Christians started to go through many rounds of persecution for their faith. Christians were arrested, tortured, killed, thrown to the lions by the Romans, ripped apart. They were discriminated against. And so listen, if that was happening to you, what will you cling to, right? You will cling to what Jesus said. In the last days, all these things will happen, right? He said there will be war. Humanity will be more evil than ever. But these are all signs that Jesus is coming to rescue you. Except human history goes through cycles, right? Cycles of war and peace. Cycles of good and evil. Right? When we live by violence, what happens? We are cursed by our violence. And then when we have enough of the curse, we cycle back to peace. And so this is sort of a running joke, right? When you're in seminary, you're studying theology, right? All the theologians, right, and the seminarians, right? We laugh about this because we study history, so we know every other generation for the last 2,000 years since Jesus came to earth, whenever times are bad, we think we are the generation of the last days before Jesus comes back again. Except he doesn't come back, and then we shift back into times of peace, right? And so everything is fine, and we just go on with our lives. Then suddenly when it happens again, Jesus is coming back for us. Okay? So, I don't know when Jesus is coming back. No idea. I hope today, tomorrow, I hope before our descendants burn from global warming. Are you here with me? But there is a way to bring heaven on earth today, right now. Never mind whether Jesus comes back or not. We can do it by changing the way our blood and our lives speak. Okay? Maybe Jesus will come one day, maybe he won't. Maybe time will end and there will be a new heaven and earth, maybe not. I don't know. But until then, I believe Jesus returns through us. Heaven comes through into this reality through us. Hell gets defeated through us. Through the way we live the one life that we have, through the way that we speak. So when Jesus gave his life on the cross for us, he came to show us that there's a different way for blood to be spilled and for life to be lived. There's a way of giving life to other people instead of taking it from other people. There's a way of bringing peace to this world instead of more anxiety and more violence. So before the verse, right, about Hebrews 12 that we read at the beginning about the blood of Abel and the blood of Jesus, there's another chapter before that in the letter that is quite beautiful, and it's all about faith. And the chapter starts by saying, faith is the reality of what we hope for, the proof of what we don't see. And then it goes on to list all these heroes in our Bible, right, who struggled in their faith with God, but found a way to, each and every time when they were discouraged, to keep on hoping. And one of the things it actually says in this chapter is very often these followers of God didn't get to see every dream they dreamt accomplished in their lifetime. But they kept on hoping, and they kept on working, and they kept on trying to make a better world. They lived, the Bible describes it like they lived like they were strangers to this reality, to this imperfect present. They kept believing that there was a home, there was a future that they were building, that they would finally feel at home in. I mean, doesn't that describe the human existence? Sometimes we feel a stranger to this world. We want it to be different. We want it to be better, but it's not. And so what do? We just keep on hoping, and we just keep on trying. And so this is what they did. So listen to me now. Today, if you're sitting here and you feel that it's hard work for you right now to hope, listen, it's okay. Every human being, every hero of the Bible struggled in this way. But please continue to hope. Please aspire to a bigger, better life. Please aspire to live a good and great life. One that is not just good for you, but good for other people. One that fights to be kind and won't stop being hopeful. Because that is the only way we bring heaven into our reality. I mean, do you want the world to be a better place? Do you want your life to be a better experience? Do you want, I don't know, your children one day to have a better world? I mean, do you want to go to school and work with less anxiety and frustration? Then listen, create that heaven for yourself and for other people. Surround yourself with people who care about that same value system. Don't get jaded and give up. Don't get paralyzed and give in. Don't get swept away by how the culture is and the environment and the news around you is. Be the one to change the world around you. Keep your hope. You see, this is what it says in Hebrews, even about Jesus, that even Jesus needed to hope. In fact, it says he endured the cross. He stayed on that cross, ignoring the shame for the sake of a joy that he could see ahead of him, coming for him. Hebrews, the Message Bible version says, because he never lost sight of where he was headed. That exhilarating finish in and with God. He could put up with anything along the way, cross, shame, whatever, because of that hope. Jesus needed to keep hope alive in order for him to keep his faith in God, in order for him to keep being faithful to his value system amidst the struggles and the pain. Hope. You see, what is hope? Hope is a vision of our future. An easier way to put it to you might be to say, what is your dream? What is your desire? What are you imagining for yourself right now if I were to ask you to close your eyes and think about your future? Now, I want to be very specific though, is that okay? Because some of you close your eyes and see is A for your test paper. One more zero on your paycheck. I dream about that too, okay? But let me be very specific about hope, right? For Christians, when we talk about hope, hope refers to the plan God has for our lives. A plan to bless you and to show you favor. But that plan is never just for you and you alone. That would be too small. Because God's plan for you always includes something bigger than you. Because, when I ask you to dream, I don't want you to just go, okay, I'm going to do well in school, I'm going to be rich, I'm going to be famous. That kind of ambition can motivate you, but it will never satisfy you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be feeling as anxious as you do today. In Singapore, right, 10, 15 years ago when I was a pastor, you always have to teach youth how to do goal setting. Like standard. Now, all the youth know how to do goal setting. They just have to go to Instagram and figure out how to do it. All of you know how to goal set. All of you know how to be ambitious. All of you have KPIs for yourself at work. You have standards for yourself about your bank account. You have all those things. And yet, you feel anxious. You get those things, and yet you feel anxious. You post about those things, and yet you feel anxious. Because that kind of vision can motivate you, but it cannot satisfy you. Innate in every human being, because remember this, God created us. He made us in His image. Innate in every human being is a desire to make a difference. Is a desire for our life to count. Human beings are made to speak the way Jesus speaks. Otherwise, Cain would have been satisfied after killing Abel. Otherwise, Cain would have been blessed, after he got rid of the competition. But instead, Cain became cursed, tormented in his mind and spirit, tormented to the point that God had compassion on him and said, I'm going to mark you and still protect you despite you being cursed. That's how much God loved him. Are you here with me? But Cain, despite getting rid of the competition, he felt more isolated. Despite getting, on top of his brother, he felt more rejected, not more accepted. Because human beings were made to speak the way Jesus speaks. And until we speak the way Jesus speaks, you will always feel anxiety. You will always feel frustration. You will always feel dissatisfaction. Because Cain's way brings a curse, and Jesus' way brings peace. So my question to you today is, what is your hope? Not what are your goals? It's what is your hope? What is the thing you wish this world could be? What is the way in which you long to participate in this future that you imagine for yourself? That is hope. And that is the hope that will help you keep your faith.